its zenith, the British Empire was an unparalleled global force, covering nearly a quarter of the Earth's land surface and ruling over 458 million people. This dominance was not merely a testament to Britain's naval prowess or military might, but a complex interplay of strategic, economic, and political factors. The empire's expansion was marked by a series of calculated moves, including the establishment of colonies across every continent, from the Americas to Asia and Africa. These territories were not just sources of raw materials, but also markets for British goods, creating a cycle of economic dependency that fueled the empire's growth. The British Empire's influence extended beyond mere land acquisition. It reshaped global trade networks, introduced new governance systems, and left a lasting impact on the cultures it touched. The empire's sheer size and diversity presented unique administrative challenges. Governors and colonial administrators were tasked with managing vast territories and diverse peoples, often with limited resources and communication delays. This required a highly organized bureaucracy capable of adapting to local conditions while maintaining the overarching interests of the empire. Comparatively, the British Empire's reach and influence surpassed that of other historical empires, such as the Roman or Mongol empires, both in terms of geographical spread and the complexity of its economic and political systems. The strategic importance of various colonies varied. Some were valued for their resources, others for their strategic military locations, and yet others for their economic potential. Each colony played a role in the intricate tapestry of the British Empire, contributing to its overall stability and prosperity. The Industrial Revolution was a pivotal catalyst in the expansion of the British Empire, providing the technological advancements and economic incentives needed to pursue imperial ambitions. This period of rapid industrialization, which began in the late 18th century, transformed Britain into the world's leading industrial power. Innovations in manufacturing, such as the steam engine and mechanized looms, revolutionized production processes, increasing efficiency and output. These technological advancements allowed Britain to produce goods on a scale never seen before, necessitating new markets for their distribution. The development of the steamship and the expansion of the railway network facilitated faster and more reliable transportation, both within Britain and across its empire. This not only enhanced trade, but also enabled the swift movement of troops and resources, reinforcing British control over its colonies. The Industrial Revolution also brought about significant social changes within Britain, creating a burgeoning middle class with interests in overseas trade and investment. This new social dynamic supported imperial expansion, as the demand for raw materials and markets to sell manufactured goods grew. Moreover, the economic prosperity brought about by industrialization provided the financial resources necessary to fund military expeditions and colonial administration, further cementing Britain's global dominance. The expansion of the British Empire was not without its challenges. Throughout its history, the empire faced numerous resistance movements and rebellions from the peoples it sought to govern. These uprisings were often fueled by dissatisfaction with British rule, including issues of taxation, cultural suppression, and land dispossession. One of the most notable rebellions was the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, which was a significant turning point in British-Indian relations. This uprising was sparked by various factors, including cultural insensitivity and economic exploitation, and resulted in the British Crown taking direct control of India from the East India Company. In Africa, resistance movements like the Zulu Wars and the Ashanti Wars highlighted the fierce opposition to colonial rule, as indigenous leaders and their people fought to retain their sovereignty and way of life. In the Caribbean, slave revolts, such as those in Jamaica and Barbados, underscored the brutal realities of British colonialism and the desire for freedom and self-determination. The British response to these rebellions varied, ranging from military suppression to negotiation and reform, often depending on the strategic importance of the territory in question. These rebellions not only challenged British authority, but also forced the empire to adapt its policies and strategies to maintain control and mitigate further unrest. The process of decolonization marked the gradual dismantling of the British Empire and the transition of its colonies to independent nations. This process was influenced by a variety of factors, including the economic and military strains of the two world wars, which weakened Britain's ability to maintain its empire. The rise of nationalist movements within the colonies, inspired by global civil rights movements and the principles of self-determination, further fueled the push for independence. Key events in the decolonization process included India's independence in 1947, which set a precedent for other colonies seeking autonomy. The role of international organizations, like the United Nations, also played a crucial part, as they promoted decolonization and provided a platform for newly independent nations to voice their concerns and aspirations. The transition to independence was often complex and fraught with challenges, as new nations grappled with issues of governance, economic stability, and identity. The legacy of colonialism left deep scars, influencing political boundaries, social structures, and economic practices in the post-colonial world. Despite these challenges, decolonization marked a significant shift in global power dynamics, as former colonies emerged as independent players on the world stage, reshaping international relations and contributing to the rich tapestry of global diversity. The Protestant Reformation, which began in the early 16th century, was not just a religious upheaval, but a catalyst that reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Europe and beyond. In England, the Reformation took on a distinctly nationalistic character as King Henry V established the Church of England, breaking away from the papal authority of the Roman Catholic Church. This religious transformation was not merely about theological disputes. It had profound political and economic implications. The English crown, seeking to weaken Catholic powers like Spain, began to look outward, driven by both the desire to spread Protestantism and the ambition to expand its influence across the globe. This period saw the intersection of faith and exploration, where the fervor for religious reform fueled maritime endeavors. The religious conflicts in Europe, notably the 30 Years' War, underscored the deep divisions between Catholic and Protestant states. These conflicts were not limited to the European continent, but extended to the New World, where religious rivalries played out in the struggle for colonial dominance. Protestantism influenced colonial governance, with new settlements often reflecting the religious ideals of their founders. In the New World, English colonists sought to create societies that embodied their religious convictions, free from the perceived corruption of Catholic influence. The age of exploration was marked by daring voyages and the relentless pursuit of new trade routes and territories. John Cabot, an Italian navigator sailing under the English flag, was among the first to explore the North American coastline in the late 15th century. His expeditions laid the groundwork for England's claims to the New World, igniting a spirit of exploration that would persist for centuries. Cabot's voyages were a testament to the technological advancements in navigation, with the development of more accurate maps and the use of the compass and astrolabe. These tools enabled explorers to venture further into uncharted waters with greater confidence. Henry Hudson, another pivotal figure, embarked on multiple voyages in the early 17th century in search of the Northwest Passage, a fabled route that promised a shortcut to Asia. Though he never found the passage, Hudson's exploration of North America's eastern coast and the bay that now bears his name was invaluable. His voyages expanded England's territorial ambitions and cemented its interest in the New World. The personal backgrounds of these explorers, driven by a mix of ambition and curiosity, played a crucial role in their enduring legacies. Their discoveries, though often motivated by economic gain, also reflected the broader geopolitical aspirations of England during this era. The Caribbean, with its strategic location and fertile lands, became an early focus of English colonization efforts. In 1624, the first permanent English settlement was established on the island of St. Kitts, followed by Barbados in 1627. These islands quickly became economic powerhouses due to the cultivation of sugar, a crop that would shape the region's economy and society for generations. The sugar trade became the cornerstone of England's colonial economy, driving further expansion and laying the groundwork for the transatlantic slave trade. The labor-intensive nature of sugar cultivation led to the establishment of plantation systems that relied heavily on enslaved African labor. This system of forced labor had profound social and economic implications, contributing to the development of a racially stratified society and fueling the global trade network. The environmental impact of monoculture crops was significant, leading to deforestation and soil depletion, which would have long-term consequences for the Caribbean's ecosystems. The Caribbean's role in the global trade network was pivotal, serving as a hub for the exchange of goods, people, and ideas between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. In 1620, the Mayflower set sail from England, carrying a group of pilgrims seeking religious freedom in the New World. Their journey and the subsequent establishment of Plymouth Colony marked a significant moment in English colonization efforts in North America. The Pilgrims' religious beliefs centered around a desire for self-governance and community, laid the foundation for the development of democratic principles in the New World. The Pilgrims' interactions with indigenous peoples were complex, involving both cooperation and conflict. While they formed alliances with some tribes, tensions and misunderstandings often led to violence and displacement. The establishment of Plymouth Colony, along with earlier settlements like Jamestown, formed the basis of England's growing American colonies, setting the stage for future expansion. The development of self-governance in New England was a crucial aspect of its identity, with town meetings and elected assemblies becoming integral to the region's political landscape. England's expansion into the New World did not occur in isolation. The nation faced fierce competition from other European powers, particularly Spain and the Netherlands, over territories and trade routes. These rivalries often spilled over into open warfare, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the era. Specific battles and treaties, such as the Anglo-Spanish War and the Treaty of Westphalia, were pivotal in defining colonial boundaries and influence. The role of privateering, where private ships were authorized to attack enemy vessels, became a common tactic in these conflicts, blurring the lines between legitimate warfare and piracy. European alliances and rivalries had a profound impact on colonial development, with shifting allegiances influencing territorial claims and trade policies. These geopolitical struggles underscored the interconnectedness of European and colonial affairs, where events in one region could have far-reaching implications for another. The emergence of the triangular trade system in the late 17th century marked a significant development in global commerce. This trade network involved the exchange of goods and enslaved Africans between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, creating a complex web of economic interdependencies. The transatlantic slave trade, driven by the demand for labor in the Americas, had a devastating human cost. Millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic, enduring horrific conditions and suffering unimaginable hardships. The economic benefits of the trade were immense, fueling the growth of industries in Europe and contributing to the wealth of colonial powers. However, the human cost of slavery was incalculable, with entire communities torn apart and cultures disrupted. Abolitionist movements, which began to gain momentum in the 18th century, sought to challenge the moral and ethical implications of slavery, eventually leading to its abolition in the 19th century. The long-term economic and cultural impacts of the triangular trade were profound, shaping the development of societies on both sides of the Atlantic. The 1630s saw a significant wave of migration, known as the Great Migration, where thousands of Puritans crossed the Atlantic to settle in the Massachusetts Bay Colony and other New England regions. This movement was driven by a desire for religious freedom and the opportunity to create a society based on Puritan principles. Puritan theology and governance emphasized the importance of community, education, and moral discipline. The creation of educational institutions, such as Harvard College in 1636, reflected the Puritans' commitment to learning and the cultivation of an informed citizenry. The social dynamics within Puritan communities were complex, with a strong emphasis on conformity and religious observance. However, dissenters like Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson challenged the rigid orthodoxy, leading to the establishment of new colonies with more diverse religious practices. The Puritan influence in New England had long-lasting effects, shaping the region's cultural and political landscape for generations. The mid-17th century was a period of significant political turmoil in England, with the outbreak of the English Civil War in 1642. This conflict between the monarchy and Parliament disrupted the usual flow of support and governance to the colonies, leading to increased autonomy as they were largely left to manage their own affairs. The restoration of the monarchy in 1660, with Charles II, brought renewed royal interest in colonial affairs. The king and his advisors recognized the potential wealth and strategic importance of overseas possessions, leading to increased investment and a more structured approach to colonial administration. The role of colonial charters became increasingly important during this period, defining the rights and responsibilities of both the colonists and the Crown. The impact of political changes in England on colonial policies was significant, with shifts in power and ideology influencing governance and economic strategies. The evolution of colonial self-governance was a critical development, laying the groundwork for the future independence movements that would emerge in the 18th century. As the chapter draws to a close, the intricate tapestry of religious motivations, exploration, competition, and conflict that marked England's early colonial endeavors becomes clear. The foundations laid during this period set the stage for the eventual emergence of a powerful British Empire, with its complexities and contradictions shaping the course of history for centuries to come. As the 17th century drew to a close, the British government recognized the growing complexity and importance of managing its colonial enterprises. This realization led to the establishment of the Board of Trade and Plantations in 1696, an institution designed to oversee colonial affairs more effectively. The Board of Trade was tasked with advising the Crown on all matters related to trade and colonial governance, marking a significant step towards a more centralized and coherent imperial policy. The board faced numerous challenges as it sought to manage the diverse and rapidly expanding British colonies. Each colony had its unique set of circumstances, laws, and economic activities, making it difficult to implement a one-size-fits-all approach. In addition, the board had to navigate the complex relationships between the colonies and the mother country, often mediating disputes and negotiating policies that balanced colonial autonomy with imperial control. In doing so, the Board of Trade played a crucial role in shaping the course of British colonial administration in the 18th century. The dawn of the 17th century saw the birth of the East India Company, a commercial enterprise that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of British influence in Asia. Founded by a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I in 1600, the company's original mission was to establish trade with the East Indies, a region rich in spices and other valuable commodities. However, the company's ambitions quickly expanded beyond mere trade. The East India Company's early years were marked by a series of strategic moves that laid the foundation for its future dominance. In 1615, the company secured trading rights from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, a pivotal moment that allowed it to establish a foothold in India. This was followed by the establishment of key trading posts in Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, which would later evolve into major centers of British power and influence in the subcontinent. The company's expansion was not without competition. Rival European powers, including the Dutch and the French, were also vying for control of Asian trade routes and markets. Yet, through a combination of strategic alliances, military engagements, and savvy diplomacy, the East India Company managed to outmaneuver its competitors and solidify its position as a dominant force in the region. By the mid-18th century, the East India Company had undergone a significant transformation. What began as a commercial venture had evolved into a quasi-governmental entity with considerable military and political power. This shift was exemplified by events such as the Anglo-Mughal War and the Battle of Plassey, which underscored the company's growing ambition and influence. The Battle of Plassey in 1757, led by Robert Clive, was a turning point in the company's history. This decisive victory against the Nawab of Bengal and his French allies marked the beginning of British political dominance in India. The company's ability to leverage military force to achieve its objectives set a precedent for its future operations and highlighted the blurred lines between commerce and governance. The company's militarization was further evidenced by its alliances with local rulers and its strategic use of its private army to exert control over vast territories. This militaristic approach allowed the company to wield significant influence over Indian politics and society, often acting as a de facto government in regions under its control. The Treaty of Allahabad in 1765 marked a watershed moment in the East India Company's evolution from a trading entity to a ruling power. This treaty granted the company the right to collect taxes, known as Diwani, in the provinces of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. With this newfound authority, the company effectively took on the role of a sovereign power, responsible for governance and administration in these regions. The implications of this transformation were profound. For the Indian subcontinent, the East India Company's rule brought about significant economic and social changes. The company's administrative policies often prioritized profit over the welfare of the local population, leading to widespread discontent and resistance. In Britain, the company's growing influence raised concerns about its unchecked power and the potential for corruption. The British government responded by enacting regulatory measures such as the Regulating Act of 1773 and the India Act of 1784 to increase oversight and ensure accountability. These acts laid the groundwork for the eventual establishment of the British Raj, a period of direct British rule in India that would last until 1947. As we shift our focus to another facet of British colonial history, we confront the nation's deep involvement in the Atlantic slave trade. This brutal commerce in human lives played a pivotal role in shaping the British Empire and left an indelible mark on global history. The roots of British participation in the slave trade can be traced back to the early 17th century, when English merchants, driven by the promise of immense profits, established the first African trading posts. These outposts served as gateways for the capture and sale of enslaved Africans, marking the beginning of Britain's long and shameful involvement in this inhumane practice. In 1672, the Royal African Company received its charter from King Charles II, granting it a monopoly over the English slave trade. This move ushered in an era of large-scale transport of enslaved Africans to the Americas, where they were forced to work on plantations producing goods like sugar, tobacco, and cotton. The profits generated from this trade fueled the growth of the British economy and contributed to the development of British colonies. The slave trade also gave rise to the notorious triangular trade system, where European goods were exchanged for enslaved Africans on the West African coast. These captured individuals were then forcibly transported across the Atlantic, enduring horrific conditions on crowded slave ships. Upon arrival in the Americas, they were sold into bondage, and the cycle continued as the profits from their sale were used to purchase raw materials that were shipped back to Europe. The economic impact of the Atlantic slave trade on Britain was profound. The wealth generated from the trade and the products of slave labor contributed to the financing of the Industrial Revolution, transforming Britain into a global economic powerhouse. The slave trade also had significant social and cultural impacts, both in Britain and in the colonies. In Britain, the profits from the trade led to the rise of a wealthy merchant class and the expansion of ports such as Liverpool and Bristol, which became key centers of the slave trade. The legacy of the slave trade is still felt today, as it laid the foundation for systemic racial inequalities and injustices that persist in many societies. In the colonies, the slave trade had devastating effects on African communities, leading to the displacement and suffering of millions of people. The brutal conditions of plantation life and the dehumanization of enslaved individuals left a lasting scar on the social fabric of the Americas. Despite the immense human cost, it was not until the late 18th century that movements towards abolition began to gain momentum. Abolitionists in Britain, driven by moral and religious convictions, campaigned tirelessly against the slave trade, eventually leading to its abolition in 1807 and the emancipation of enslaved people throughout the British Empire in 1833. As we reflect on this dark chapter of British history, it is essential to acknowledge the resilience and resistance of those who fought against the injustices of the slave trade and to recognize the enduring impact of this period on the world today. In conclusion, the 17th and 18th centuries were marked by significant developments in British colonial history, from the establishment of the Board of Trade to the rise of the East India Company and the brutal realities of the Atlantic slave trade. These events set the stage for the emergence of the British Empire and shaped the course of history in ways that continue to resonate in the present day. As we move forward, it is crucial to learn from the past and strive towards a more just and equitable future for all. The 18th century marked a period of relentless expansion for the British Empire, driven by the increasing demand for labor across its colonies in the Caribbean and America. The booming sugar and tobacco plantations required a vast workforce, and this need was met through the horrific trade in enslaved Africans. British ports like Liverpool, Bristol, and London became central hubs in this global network of exploitation. These cities thrived economically as the trade in human lives flourished, their fortunes built on the suffering and dehumanization of countless Africans. Liverpool, in particular, grew wealthy and influential, with its economy heavily reliant on the slave trade. Ships would depart from these ports laden with goods to be traded for human lives in Africa. The return voyages brought enslaved people to the Americas, where they were forced into brutal labor. This cycle of exploitation was not just an economic transaction, but a human tragedy on an immense scale. The impact of the slave trade on African societies was catastrophic. Communities were torn apart, as millions of people were forcibly removed from their homelands. The social and economic structures of African societies were disrupted, and the legacy of this exploitation is still felt today. The moral cost of the trade was immense, yet it fueled the prosperity of Britain and its colonies. The Middle Passage, the leg of the transatlantic journey that transported enslaved Africans to the Americas, was notorious for its brutality. Enslaved individuals were packed tightly into ships, with little regard for their dignity or humanity. The conditions on these voyages were horrific, with overcrowding, disease, and malnutrition leading to high mortality rates. The psychological and physical toll on the captives was immense. Many did not survive the journey, their bodies callously discarded into the sea. For those who endured, the arrival in the Americas marked the beginning of a life of hardship and exploitation. Resistance to this inhumane treatment was not uncommon. There were instances of revolts aboard ships, as enslaved individuals fought for their freedom, often at great personal risk. These acts of defiance highlighted the resilience and courage of those who were subjected to unimaginable suffering. As the 18th century drew to a close, voices of dissent began to rise against the slave trade. The abolitionist movement gained momentum, spearheaded by figures like William Wilberforce, who tirelessly campaigned to expose the horrors of the trade and push for its abolition. Public opinion began to shift, influenced by the growing awareness of the moral and human costs of the trade. The abolitionists employed a range of strategies to sway public sentiment, from public lectures and pamphlets to powerful testimonies from former slaves. Their efforts culminated in the passing of the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807. This landmark legislation marked a significant step towards ending Britain's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. However, it is important to note that while the trade was outlawed, slavery itself persisted in British colonies. The ban on the slave trade did not immediately end the trafficking of human beings. Illegal trading continued, prompting the British Navy to take action. Anti-slavery patrols were established along the West African coast, tasked with intercepting slave ships and liberating their captives. These naval campaigns marked a dramatic shift in British policy, from facilitating the slave trade to actively working to suppress it. The challenges faced by these patrols were immense. The vastness of the ocean made it difficult to intercept every ship, and the illegal trade continued to thrive. However, there were notable successes, with many enslaved individuals freed and returned to Africa. The 18th century was not only a time of moral reckoning, but also of territorial expansion for the British Empire. The series of wars, such as the War of Spanish Succession and the 7 Years' War, significantly reshaped Britain's global presence. The War of Spanish Succession, fought from 1701 to 1714, ended with the Treaty of Utrecht, which brought significant gains for Britain. Gibraltar, a small but strategically crucial peninsula, came under British control. Parts of Canada were also ceded to Britain, expanding its North American territories. Perhaps most controversially, Britain gained the Asiento, a contract granting the right to supply enslaved Africans to Spanish colonies, further entrenching Britain's role in the Atlantic slave trade. The 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763 catapulted Britain to the forefront of global powers. Often called the First World War due to its global scope, this conflict pitted Britain against France and its allies. The war's conclusion with the Treaty of Paris in 1763 marked a turning point in world history. Britain emerged as the dominant colonial power, with far-reaching consequences for its empire. The Treaty of Paris brought Britain substantial territorial gains. France ceded Canada, ending its presence in North America east of the Mississippi. Spain handed over Florida, further consolidating British control in North America. In India, British influence expanded significantly, setting the stage for future dominance of the subcontinent. During this same period, a pivotal event occurred in India that would have far-reaching consequences. In 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, forces of the British East India Company, led by Robert Clive, defeated the Nawab of Bengal and his French allies. This victory marked the beginning of British rule in India, transforming the East India Company from a trading organization into a governing power. The company's control over Bengal, India's richest province, provided vast resources that fueled further British expansion. The economic exploitation and resource extraction from India were immense. The wealth generated from Indian resources played a crucial role in funding Britain's imperial ambitions. However, this exploitation came at a significant cost to Indian society. The cultural and social impacts of British rule were profound, with traditional structures disrupted and communities subjected to foreign governance. Resistance to British rule was not uncommon, with numerous uprisings and rebellions highlighting the discontent among the Indian populace. Britain's imperial ambitions faced a significant setback with the American Revolution between 1775 and 1783. The loss of the 13 colonies was a blow to British prestige and power. Yet, in a twist of historical irony, this defeat ultimately redirected British focus towards Asia and Africa, regions that would become crucial to the empire's future growth. Despite the loss in North America, Britain continued to acquire new territories throughout the late 18th century. The redirection of British imperial strategy towards other parts of the world marked a pivotal shift in the empire's growth trajectory. By the end of the 18th century, Britain had emerged as a dominant colonial power, its influence and reach extending across the globe. The expansion of the British Empire had profound implications for global politics and trade. Britain's position among world powers was unrivaled, with its naval supremacy and colonial holdings setting the stage for its role in shaping the modern world. In comparison to other colonial powers, Britain's influence was vast. The legacy of British colonialism is complex, marked by both economic prosperity and exploitation. The cultural and governance systems introduced by Britain had lasting impacts on the colonies, many of which continue to resonate today. As we reflect on this period of expansion and the human cost involved, it is crucial to learn from the past and strive towards a more just and equitable future for all. The legacy of the British Empire is a testament to the complexities of history and the enduring impact of colonialism on the modern world. The 18th century heralded a transformative era for the British Empire, particularly in India, where the East India Company played a pivotal role in expanding British control through a series of military engagements with local rulers. The Anglo-Mysore Wars and the Anglo-Maratha Wars were instrumental in this expansion. These conflicts were not mere skirmishes, but significant military campaigns that expanded British territory and influence across the Indian subcontinent. The strategic importance of India was not lost on the British, who saw the region as a linchpin in their imperial ambitions. India's vast resources and strategic position made it a valuable asset for the British, who were keen on exploiting these advantages to fortify their global dominance. At the heart of this expansion were economic incentives. The British were driven by the prospect of accessing India's wealth of raw materials such as cotton, silk, and spices, which were in high demand in European markets. These resources were not only crucial for maintaining Britain's economic supremacy, but also for fueling the burgeoning industrial revolution back home. Local resistance and alliances played a crucial role in shaping the course of British expansion. While many Indian rulers resisted British advances, others saw an alliance with the British as a strategic move to counter rival factions. This intricate web of alliances and conflicts ultimately paved the way for the British to consolidate their power. The East India Company, initially established as a trading entity, underwent a remarkable transformation during this period, evolving into a governing body that would serve as a model for future colonial administrations. Its role in global trade was unparalleled, with the company controlling significant trade routes and commodities. This dominance in commerce naturally extended to governance. As the company began to wield political power in the regions it traded with, the administrative and governance changes that facilitated this transformation were profound. The company implemented new systems of governance that were more aligned with British interests, often at the expense of local customs and practices. This shift from a purely commercial entity to a quasi-governmental organization was marked by the establishment of a complex bureaucracy that managed everything from revenue collection to law enforcement. Comparatively, the East India Company's model of governance stood out among other colonial powers, which often relied on direct rule. The company's ability to integrate local rulers into its administration through treaties and alliances was a testament to its adaptability and strategic acumen. The impact on Indian society and economy was significant. Traditional industries and local economies were disrupted as the company imposed its economic policies. The introduction of new land revenue systems, for instance, led to widespread changes in agrarian society, often resulting in hardship for local farmers. The loss of the American colonies was a watershed moment for the British Empire, prompting a reassessment of its imperial strategy. The American Revolution, which began as a conflict over taxation and representation, ended with the loss of Britain's most prized overseas possessions. This loss forced Britain to reconsider its approach to empire building. Economically, the loss of the American colonies was significant. The colonies had been a vital source of raw materials and a market for British manufactured goods. Their loss meant Britain had to look elsewhere to fulfill these economic needs, making India even more crucial to British imperial ambitions. Politically, the loss highlighted the limitations of indirect colonial governance. The American colonies had developed a strong sense of identity and autonomy, which ultimately led to their rebellion. This realization prompted Britain to shift towards more direct forms of colonial governance, particularly evident in India. Militarily, the defeat underscored the need for a more robust defense strategy. Britain strengthened its naval and military presence in other parts of the world, determined to prevent similar uprisings. This strategic shift was instrumental in consolidating the British hold over existing possessions and expanding into new territories. In the aftermath of the American Revolution, Britain embarked on a series of reforms to tighten its grip on remaining colonies and prevent future rebellions. These reforms were comprehensive and aimed at centralizing control. Governance structures were overhauled to ensure more direct oversight by the British Crown. In India, these reforms manifested in the gradual transition from company rule to direct Crown rule. The Government of India Act of 1858 was a landmark in this transition, marking the end of the East India Company's administrative role and the beginning of direct imperial governance. Measures to suppress autonomy movements were also implemented. The British were keen to prevent the emergence of a distinct colonial identity that could fuel rebellion, as had happened in America. This involved not only political and administrative changes, but also cultural and educational policies aimed at promoting British values and loyalty to the Crown. Britain's naval supremacy was a cornerstone of its imperial strategy, enabling it to project power globally and maintain its empire. The Royal Navy was unmatched in its size and capabilities, allowing Britain to secure vital trade routes and protect its colonial interests. Key naval battles during this period, such as the Battle of Trafalgar, underscored Britain's naval dominance. These victories not only secured British control over the seas, but also deterred potential adversaries from challenging its supremacy. The role of the Navy in securing trade routes was crucial. Britain's economic prosperity depended heavily on its ability to transport goods across the globe, and the Navy ensured these routes remained open and safe from piracy and rival powers. In comparison with other naval powers of the time, Britain's Navy was in a league of its own. Its technological innovations, such as the development of faster and more maneuverable ships, gave it a significant edge over its rivals. The Industrial Revolution was a game changer for the British Empire, transforming it into a global economic powerhouse. This period of rapid industrialization created an insatiable demand for raw materials and new markets, making Britain's colonial empire more vital than ever. Technological innovations, such as the steam engine and mechanized textile production, revolutionized manufacturing processes and increased production capacity. This industrial growth necessitated a steady supply of raw materials, much of which came from Britain's colonies. The relationship between industrial growth and colonial expansion was symbiotic. As Britain's industrial base expanded, so too did its empire, as new territories were acquired to meet the resource demands of its factories. Shifts in global trade dynamics also occurred during this period. Britain's dominance in manufacturing and trade made it the world's leading economic power, with its colonies serving as both suppliers of raw materials and markets for finished goods. Following the loss of the American colonies, Britain turned its attention to India, recognizing its strategic importance in the broader context of imperial ambitions. The East India Company intensified its efforts to expand British control through military victories and strategic alliances. Key figures in these expansion efforts, such as Lord Cornwallis and Warren Hastings, played instrumental roles in consolidating British power in India. Their policies and administrative reforms laid the groundwork for the establishment of British rule over the entire subcontinent. In comparison with other British colonies, India's significance was unmatched. Its vast resources and strategic location made it a cornerstone of British imperial strategy, influencing policies and decisions across the empire. The long-term impacts on Indian governance and society were profound. British rule brought about significant changes in administrative structures, economic policies, and social dynamics, many of which continue to resonate in India today. The late 18th and early 19th centuries were marked by a sustained focus on imperial growth, as Britain consolidated its existing possessions and expanded into new territories. Diplomatic strategies and alliances played a crucial role in this expansion. Britain skillfully navigated the complex web of international relations to secure its interests and expand its influence. The role of colonial profits in funding further expansion cannot be overstated. The wealth generated from colonies like India was reinvested into military and naval capabilities, enabling further conquests and consolidations. The impact on indigenous populations and cultures was significant. British expansion often came at the expense of local traditions and societies, leading to cultural disruptions and social upheavals. As we reflect on this period of rapid expansion and the human cost involved, it is crucial to learn from the past and strive towards a more just and equitable future for all. The legacy of the British Empire is a testament to the complexities of history and the enduring impact of colonialism on the modern world. In the wake of the Industrial Revolution, Britain's economic strategy hinged on a complex, yet symbiotic relationship with its colonies. This relationship was built on the extraction of resources and the creation of markets for British goods, fundamentally shaping the empire's economic trajectory for decades. At the heart of this relationship was the flow of resources from colonies to the imperial center. Colonies in India, the Caribbean, and Africa supplied essential raw materials such as cotton, sugar, and minerals. These resources were transformed in British factories into finished goods, textiles, machinery, and manufactured items, which were then exported back to the colonies and beyond. This system was heavily skewed in Britain's favor, generating vast wealth for the mother country, while often exploiting colonial labor to an extreme degree. Though this trade network created economic dependencies, it also led to significant exploitation, with colonial economies frequently structured to serve British interests, rather than their own development. The prosperity of British industry was built upon the backs of colonial workers who laboured under harsh conditions for minimal reward. The economic dependencies established during this period would have long-lasting impacts, shaping the trajectories of both the empire and its colonies. The surge in Britain's industrial capacity was driven by technological innovations that revolutionized production processes. The textile industry, in particular, became the centerpiece of Britain's economic might, buoyed by inventions such as the spinning jenny, the water frame, and the power loom. These innovations drastically increased the efficiency of textile production, enabling British manufacturers to dominate the global market for cotton goods. The spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves in 1764, allowed a single worker to spin multiple spools of thread simultaneously, vastly increasing productivity. This was followed by Richard Arkwright's water frame, which harnessed water power to drive the spinning process, further enhancing output. Finally, the power loom, developed by Edmund Cartwright, mechanized the weaving process, completing the transformation of the textile industry. These technological advancements not only bolstered Britain's position as a global leader in textile production, but also stimulated broader industrial growth. They laid the groundwork for the mechanization of other industries, contributing to the rapid expansion of Britain's industrial economy. However, this mechanization also had profound social implications, as it altered labor dynamics and prompted significant shifts in employment patterns. Britain's industrial and economic expansion was not an isolated phenomenon. It was deeply intertwined with the integration of its colonies into a global economic network. This network functioned through a series of trade routes that crisscrossed the empire, facilitating the flow of raw materials to Britain and the export of finished goods to colonial markets. The mechanics of this colonial trade system were complex and meticulously organized. British economic policies favored free trade and the reduction of tariffs, allowing for the seamless movement of goods across vast distances. This not only ensured a steady supply of raw materials to British factories, but also secured markets for British exports, reinforcing the economic dominance of the empire. The effects of this integration were far-reaching. Colonial economies were often restructured to prioritize the production of specific commodities needed by Britain, leading to a monoculture that stunted local economic diversification. This integration also reshaped global trade patterns, positioning Britain at the center of a sprawling economic web that spanned continents. The efficiency of Britain's global trade network was significantly enhanced by the transportation revolution of the 19th century. The advent of steamships and railways dramatically reduced transportation costs and travel times, facilitating the rapid movement of goods and people across the empire. Steamships, powered by coal-fired engines, could travel faster and more reliably than their sail-powered predecessors. This revolutionized maritime trade, allowing British goods to reach distant markets with unprecedented speed. Meanwhile, the development of an extensive railway network within Britain and its colonies facilitated the efficient transport of raw materials to ports and finished goods to markets. This transportation revolution was crucial not only for trade, but also for the administration and defense of Britain's far-flung empire. The ability to quickly move troops and supplies across vast distances enabled Britain to maintain control over its territories and respond swiftly to challenges, both internal and external. The industrialization of Britain brought about profound social changes, transforming the fabric of British society in ways that would resonate for generations. Urbanization was one of the most significant consequences, as people flocked from rural areas to cities in search of work. This migration led to the rapid expansion of urban centers, with cities like Manchester and Birmingham emerging as major industrial hubs. However, this urbanization also resulted in severe overcrowding and poor living conditions. Many workers lived in cramped and unsanitary housing, often in close proximity to factories that polluted the air and water. These conditions gave rise to a new industrial working class, characterized by long hours, low wages, and hazardous working environments. The social landscape of Britain was fundamentally altered by these developments. New class divisions emerged, with a clear distinction between the industrial capitalists, who owned the means of production, and the working class, who labored in their factories. This period also saw the rise of social movements, advocating for better working conditions and labor rights, laying the groundwork for future social reforms. The wealth generated by Britain's Industrial Revolution allowed it to achieve unparalleled financial ascendancy, solidifying its influence on the global stage. London emerged as the world's financial capital, home to the Bank of England and numerous other financial institutions that played a pivotal role in international trade and finance. The Bank of England, established in 1694, became the world's most important financial institution during this period. It not only managed the British currency, but also acted as a lender of last resort to other banks, stabilizing the financial system. The pound sterling served as the global reserve currency, facilitating international commerce and cementing Britain's economic dominance. This financial power gave Britain significant influence over global economic affairs. British capital funded infrastructure projects around the world, from railways in India to telegraph lines in Africa, spreading British technology and expertise across the globe. However, this financial and industrial dominance also had its downsides, as it created tensions with emerging industrial powers and contributed to economic inequalities, both within Britain and globally. The industrial wealth of Britain also fueled significant military investment, particularly in naval power, which was essential for protecting trade routes and expanding the empire. The Royal Navy, already a formidable force, became the world's strongest maritime power, ensuring Britain's control of the seas. Naval supremacy was crucial for several reasons. Firstly, it allowed Britain to protect its vast network of trade routes, ensuring the uninterrupted flow of goods and resources. Secondly, it enabled Britain to project power globally, intervening in conflicts and shaping world events to its advantage. Finally, the Navy played a key role in defending the empire against external threats, maintaining British dominance on the global stage. The Napoleonic Wars marked a pivotal moment in Britain's rise as a global superpower, testing its military might, economic strength, and diplomatic skills. These conflicts, spanning from 1803 to 1815, pitted Britain against Napoleon's French Empire in a series of battles that stretched across Europe, the Americas, Egypt, and India. Britain's role in these conflicts was pivotal. The Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 was a defining moment, with Admiral Horatio Nelson leading the British fleet to a decisive victory over the combined French and Spanish navies. This victory ensured British control of the seas, dealing a severe blow to Napoleon's plans for invasion and allowing Britain to maintain its global trade networks. The conflict reached its climax at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where the Duke of Wellington led a coalition of forces to defeat Napoleon once and for all. This victory marked the end of the French Emperor's rule and ushered in a new era of British dominance in Europe and beyond. In the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, Britain emerged as the undisputed global superpower. The Congress of Vienna, held from 1814 to 1815, redrew the map of Europe, with Britain playing a key role in these negotiations. The goal was to create a balance of power that would prevent any single nation from dominating the continent, an approach known as splendid isolation. This strategic diplomatic stance allowed Britain to maintain its influence without becoming entangled in continental conflicts, focusing instead on expanding its empire and economic reach. The legacy of this period is one of profound transformation, as Britain leveraged its industrial and military might to shape the world in its image. The economic and social changes wrought by the Industrial Revolution set the stage for Britain's global dominance, leaving a lasting impact on the modern world. The 19th century was a transformative era for Britain, marking a period of immense expansion and influence across the globe. The end of the Napoleonic Wars ushered in a time of relative peace and prosperity, known as Pax Britannica, during which Britain established itself as the preeminent global power. This chapter explores the strategic gains from British territorial expansion, the role of the Royal Navy, and the cultural and political impacts that shaped the world during this period. Following the Napoleonic Wars, Britain secured several key territories that bolstered its strategic and economic standing. The Cape Colony in South Africa, seized from the Dutch in 1806, served as a crucial base on the maritime route to India. This acquisition not only strengthened Britain's naval presence in the region, but also facilitated trade and settlement. Similarly, the addition of Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, further cemented Britain's dominance in the Indian Ocean. These territories played a pivotal role in expanding Britain's global trade networks. They allowed for more efficient and secure routes to India, a cornerstone of British colonial policy. Local economies were integrated into the British Empire, creating new opportunities for agriculture, mining, and commerce. This expansion was not just about acquiring land, but about weaving these territories into a complex web of global trade and influence. The era of Pax Britannica, stretching from 1915 to 1914, was characterized by Britain's unrivaled naval supremacy and its strategic use of power. With its main European rival defeated, Britain was free to focus on consolidating its imperial gains and expanding its economic influence. This period saw a remarkable growth in British overseas trade and investment. British diplomacy during this time was marked by a balance of power strategy. The country positioned itself as an impartial global arbiter, intervening in international conflicts, not with the intent of conquest, but to maintain a stable balance of power favorable to its interests. This approach allowed Britain to exert influence far beyond its formal empire, shaping global affairs in ways that persisted well into the 20th century. The Royal Navy was the cornerstone of Britain's rise to global dominance. From the 18th century onwards, the Navy secured vital sea routes and enabled the empire's expansion across the world's oceans. Its maritime supremacy was crucial in establishing British power far beyond its shores. Throughout the 19th century, the Navy played a decisive role in Britain's military victories. The 7 Years' War, fought from 1756 to 1763, saw the Royal Navy defeat French forces in North America and India. These victories established British supremacy in both regions, laying the groundwork for future colonial expansion. Technological advancements kept the Royal Navy at the forefront of maritime power. The 19th century saw a dramatic shift from wooden sailing ships to steam-powered ironclads. This transition ensured the Navy's continued superiority and adaptability to new forms of warfare and global policing. The launch of HMS Dreadnought in 1906 revolutionized naval warfare, making all existing battleships obsolete and cementing Britain's naval dominance. The concept of gunboat diplomacy became a powerful tool for securing British interests without direct conflict. The mere presence of British warships off a foreign coast could often resolve disputes in Britain's favour. This strategy allowed Britain to influence international affairs through a show of strength rather than force. Case studies of gunboat diplomacy illustrate its effectiveness. In 1850, for instance, a British fleet off the coast of Greece compelled the Greek government to release British nationals detained over a trade dispute, showcasing the Navy's role in protecting British citizens and interests abroad. This approach to diplomacy was not without its critics, but it undeniably secured British interests and extended its influence across the globe. After 1807, the Royal Navy took on a new role in enforcing the abolition of the slave trade. Anti-slavery patrols along the African coast intercepted slave ships and liberated their captives. These patrols demonstrated Britain's commitment to ending this inhumane practice and elevated its moral standing globally. The logistics and challenges of these anti-slavery patrols were significant. The Navy had to navigate vast stretches of the Atlantic, often facing harsh conditions and resistance from slave traders. Despite these challenges, the Navy's efforts contributed to a gradual decline in the transatlantic slave trade. This role furthered Britain's image as a nation committed to humanitarian causes, even as it continued to expand its empire. The Royal Navy became a symbol of national pride and identity within Britain. It was celebrated in literature, art, and popular culture, with naval heroes like Horatio Nelson achieving legendary status. Their exploits inspired generations of Britons and reinforced the Navy's role as a pillar of national strength. The Navy also provided opportunities for social mobility. Talented individuals could rise through the ranks regardless of their background, promoting a sense of meritocracy within the service. This social dynamic contributed to a broader sense of unity and shared purpose within the nation. The expansion of the British Empire during Pax Britannica was rapid and extensive. Key acquisitions like Hong Kong and territories in Africa were driven by economic and strategic motivations. The empire's growth provided significant economic benefits through access to new markets and resources. The geopolitical significance of new territories was immense. Hong Kong, for instance, became a vital foothold in East Asia, crucial for British trade and influence in the region for over a century. The scramble for Africa in the late 19th century saw Britain claim vast swaths of the continent, further extending its reach. This expansion posed administrative challenges. Governing a vast and diverse empire required innovative approaches to colonial administration and posed questions about the integration of different cultures and societies. These challenges were met with varying degrees of success, reflecting the complexity of managing an empire of such scale. British cultural and political institutions spread across the globe during this period, leaving a lasting impact on former colonies. The introduction of British legal systems and the spread of the English language are just a few examples of this influence. In many colonies, British cultural assimilation was met with resistance. Local societies adopted some aspects of British governance and culture while preserving their own traditions. This dynamic created a blend of cultures that continues to influence these regions today. The legacy of British institutions is complex, with both positive and negative aspects. While British law and governance brought certain efficiencies, they also imposed foreign systems on diverse societies, often disregarding local customs and traditions. In conclusion, the era of Pax Britannica was one of profound transformation for Britain and the world. From strategic territorial gains to the spread of cultural and political institutions, Britain's influence during this time was vast and enduring. The Royal Navy's dominance and the diplomatic strategies employed underscore the complex interplay of power, culture, and commerce that defined this period. As we transition into the next chapter, we will explore how these developments set the stage for the challenges and changes of the 20th century. By the early 20th century, Britain's influence in Africa was vast, controlling nearly 1/3 of the continent's population. This dominance was a direct result of the Industrial Revolution, which had transformed Britain into the world's workshop. Manufacturing innovations allowed Britain to produce a vast array of goods that were exported globally. British ships, known for their reliability and speed, carried these goods to every corner of the world, ensuring British economic reach was unparalleled. London emerged as the global financial capital, with the pound sterling serving as the world's reserve currency. This economic might was not confined to formal colonies, but extended through informal means. Britain wielded significant economic influence in regions like Latin America and the Middle East without direct colonial governance. This informal empire allowed Britain to shape global affairs and protect its interests without the burdens of formal administration. Massive infrastructure projects further connected the empire's far-flung territories. Railways crisscrossed India and Africa, facilitating the movement of goods, people, and troops. Telegraph lines linked London to distant colonies, enabling rapid communication across vast distances. New ports and shipping routes streamlined global trade, with all roads seemingly leading back to Britain. Britain's informal empire was a testament to its diplomatic prowess and economic strength. In regions where direct rule was impractical or unnecessary, Britain exerted influence through trade and finance. Latin America, for example, became a region where British goods were in high demand, and British banks provided crucial financial services. This economic presence allowed Britain to influence local politics and maintain stability favorable to its interests. In the Middle East, Britain secured important trade routes and established alliances with local rulers. The strategic importance of the Suez Canal, a vital link to India and the rest of the empire, underscored the need for British influence in the region. By controlling key economic assets and engaging in strategic diplomacy, Britain maintained a significant presence without the need for formal colonization. Infrastructure was a crucial tool for consolidating and expanding the British Empire's reach. Railways were not only vital for economic purposes, but also served military logistics, allowing rapid deployment of troops within and between colonies. The construction of railways in Africa, though often met with resistance, enabled more efficient administration and extraction of resources. Telegraph lines revolutionized communication, shrinking the vast distances between London and its colonies. Decisions that once took weeks could be communicated almost instantaneously, allowing for more effective governance. Ports and shipping routes were expanded and modernized, ensuring British commercial dominance on the seas. The spread of British culture during this period was profound. The English language became the lingua franca of international commerce and diplomacy. British legal systems and institutions were introduced, reshaping governance structures in colonies and influencing legal frameworks that would persist long after colonial rule ended. Education systems modelled on British examples were established, creating a new class of English-speaking elites. These individuals often played key roles in the administration of colonies and later in the independence movements that would arise. However, this cultural imperialism was not without resistance. Many colonies experienced a resurgence of local traditions and languages as a form of opposition to British dominance. As the 19th century turned into the 20th, the seeds of change were already being sown. Nationalist movements began to gain momentum in various colonies. In India, the formation of the Indian National Congress in 1885 marked the beginning of organized resistance to British rule. Similar movements emerged in Africa and other parts of the empire, challenging the notion of British superiority and the right to rule. These movements were often inspired by global ideas of self, determination, and democracy. The emergence of educated elites who had been exposed to such ideas played a crucial role in advocating for independence. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India became symbols of resistance, inspiring others to fight for their nation's sovereignty. Despite its vast reach, the British Empire faced significant challenges from emerging powers. Germany's rapid industrialization and naval expansion posed a growing threat to British supremacy. The United States, with its burgeoning economy and influence, was becoming a formidable force, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. The competition for global dominance led to tensions and conflicts, as Britain sought to maintain its position. The naval arms race with Germany, for instance, was a direct result of the need to secure British interests against potential rivals. The late 19th century saw a renewed focus on Africa, leading to the scramble for Africa. This period was marked by intense competition among European powers to claim territories on the continent. The Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 formalized these claims, dividing Africa among colonial powers with little regard for existing African kingdoms or ethnic boundaries. Britain's motivations were multifaceted. Control over key trade routes, such as the Suez Canal, was paramount. Access to Africa's vast natural resources, including gold, diamonds, and rubber, promised immense wealth. The British sought to create a continuous line of territories from Cairo to Cape Town, known as the Cape to Cairo Red Line. While this vision was never fully realized, it shaped British policy in Africa for decades. Britain employed various methods to administer its African territories. In West Africa, particularly Nigeria, the British often used a system of indirect rule. This approach involved governing through existing local power structures, allowing traditional leaders to maintain some authority under British oversight. In contrast, regions like Kenya and southern Rhodesia, modern-day Zimbabwe, saw more direct British control and significant European settlement. These areas were administered by British officials with little input from local populations. The effectiveness and legacy of these methods varied, with indirect rule often leading to more stable transitions post-independence, while direct rule left a legacy of tension and conflict. The impact of British colonization on African societies was profound. Traditional structures were disrupted, economies were reoriented towards British needs, and social hierarchies were altered. Yet, Amid these changes, African societies demonstrated resilience, preserving cultural identities and laying the groundwork for future independence movements. As the British Empire reached its zenith, it was clear that change was on the horizon. The rise of nationalist movements, coupled with challenges from emerging powers, signaled the beginning of a new era. The stage was set for the dramatic transformations of the 20th century, as nations across the globe would seek to redefine their identities and destinies in a rapidly changing world. The British colonization of Africa brought profound changes to the continent's traditional political and economic structures. Traditional systems of governance, which had been developed and maintained over centuries, were suddenly disrupted. The British imposed a new political framework that often ignored existing social hierarchies and cultural practices. This was exemplified by the system of indirect rule, where colonial powers governed through local leaders, who were often opted to enforce colonial policies. These local leaders, however, often lacked legitimacy among their people, leading to tensions and conflicts. Economically, the British reoriented local economies to serve the needs of the empire. Communities that had thrived on subsistence, farming and local trading were forced to grow cash crops such as cotton and cocoa, which were then exported to fuel British industries. This shift not only altered traditional agricultural practices, but also made African economies vulnerable to fluctuations in global market prices. The arbitrary drawing of borders by colonial powers, which disregarded ethnic and cultural divisions, further exacerbated tensions. Communities that had coexisted for generations found themselves divided by new borders, leading to conflicts that persist to this day. These borders were drawn with little regard for the complex tapestry of ethnicities and cultures that characterized the continent, creating a legacy of division and strife. One of the most devastating aspects of British colonial rule in Africa was the exploitation of its rich natural resources. The British Empire's insatiable demand for raw materials led to widespread environmental degradation and social disruption. Forced labor was often employed to extract minerals, harvest cash crops, and build infrastructure. African workers were subjected to brutal working conditions, with little regard for their health or well-being. In regions like the Congo, rubber and mineral extraction became synonymous with violence and exploitation. Case studies from the copper mines of Zambia and the gold mines of South Africa reveal how local labor was exploited to benefit British interests. Multinational companies, often backed by colonial authorities, extracted vast wealth from African soil, leaving behind environmental destruction and impoverished communities. The long-term environmental impacts of this resource extraction continue to affect African ecosystems and communities, with issues such as deforestation, soil degradation, and water pollution persisting as legacies of colonial exploitation. Despite the overwhelming power of the British Empire, African resistance to colonization was widespread and determined. Throughout the continent, various communities rose up against colonial rule, often facing brutal repression in response. The Moji Moji Rebellion in German East Africa from 1905 to 1907, though not directly under British control, serves as a stark reminder of the violence of colonial rule. Similarly, the Herero and Nama genocide in German Southwest Africa from 1904 to 1908 highlighted the lengths to which colonial powers would go to suppress resistance. In British-controlled territories, resistance took many forms, from cultural defiance to armed uprisings. Traditional leaders often played a crucial role in mobilizing their communities against colonial authorities, drawing on deep-rooted cultural and spiritual beliefs to inspire resistance. The influence of external events, such as global movements for self-determination and the decline of European powers, also inspired and strengthened African resistance. These struggles against colonialism, though often met with brutal repression, sowed the seeds of future independence movements. Early nationalist organizations began to form, challenging British rule and demanding greater rights for African people. These movements would gain strength in the 20th century, eventually leading to the wave of independence that swept across Africa in the 1950s and 1960s. The year 1858 marked a turning point in India's history, with the British Crown taking direct control following the Indian Rebellion of 1857. This began the period known as the British Raj, characterized by a centralized administration, led by a viceroy governing on behalf of the British monarch. Under the British Raj, India's governance and economy underwent significant changes. The British implemented policies aimed at exploiting India's vast resources, transforming the subcontinent into a supplier of raw materials like cotton and tea. This economic strategy was designed to fuel Britain's industrial growth, while simultaneously creating a market for British manufactured goods in India. To support these economic interests, the British embarked on massive infrastructure projects, most notably the construction of railways. By 1900, India had the fourth largest railway network in the world, facilitating the movement of goods and military forces across the subcontinent. While these railways primarily served British economic and military needs, they also facilitated the exchange of ideas and cultures across India. The British introduced several social reforms during this period, with varying degrees of success. The abolition of practices like sati, where widows were expected to immolate themselves on their husband's funeral pyre, was a significant step forward. The introduction of Western education systems had far-reaching effects, creating a new class of English-educated Indians who would later play a crucial role in the independence movement. However, these reforms often disrupted traditional social structures and cultural practices. The emphasis on English education marginalized Indian languages and traditional knowledge systems, leading to a cultural disruption that became a focal point of resistance to British rule. The rise of a Western, educated Indian middle class fueled nationalist movements, with the formation of the Indian National Congress in 1885 marking a significant milestone. Initially, the Congress sought greater rights for Indians within the British system, but over time it evolved into the primary vehicle for the Indian independence movement. The cultural disruptions caused by British rule in India played a crucial role in fostering a new Indian middle class that would spearhead nationalist movements. The introduction of English education and the marginalization of traditional knowledge systems created a sense of cultural alienation among many Indians. However, this also led to the emergence of a new intellectual class that began to question and challenge British rule. The role of print media in spreading nationalist ideas cannot be understated. Newspapers and pamphlets in multiple languages became powerful tools for disseminating nationalist ideas and mobilizing public opinion. The influence of global intellectual movements, such as the ideas of self-determination and democracy, also played a significant role in shaping Indian nationalism. The formation of the Indian National Congress marked the beginning of a structured political movement for independence. Over time, the Congress evolved from a platform seeking reform within the British system to a movement demanding complete independence. India's involvement in the world wars significantly impacted its relationship with Britain and fueled calls for greater political rights. During World War I, over 1 million Indian soldiers fought for the British Empire, with the expectation that their service would be rewarded with political reforms. However, British promises of reform were only partially fulfilled, leading to growing frustration and intensified calls for self-rule. The interwar period saw the emergence of influential leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, who led non-violent resistance movements against British rule. The Salt March of 1930, where Gandhi led a protest against the British salt monopoly, became an iconic moment in the struggle for independence. These movements gained widespread support, putting increasing pressure on the British administration. The outbreak of World War II further strained the relationship between Britain and India. The British declaration of war on India's behalf, without consultation, sparked outrage among Indian leaders. In 1942, the Indian National Congress launched the Quit India movement, demanding an immediate end to British rule. This movement marked a critical point in the push for independence, although it was met with harsh repression by the British authorities. After World War II, Britain found itself weakened and facing mounting pressure, both in India and at home. The new Labour government in Britain, led by Clement Attlee, recognized that maintaining control over India was no longer feasible. In 1947, Britain agreed to grant independence to India. The process of independence was marred by the partition of India into two separate nations, India and Pakistan. This division, based largely on religious lines, resulted in widespread violence and one of the largest mass migrations in human history. Millions of people were displaced, and hundreds of thousands lost their lives in the chaos that ensued. The role of religious and political leaders in the partition process was significant, with differing visions for the future of India contributing to the decision to divide the country. The humanitarian crisis that followed the partition had long-lasting impacts on both India and Pakistan, with ongoing tensions and conflicts shaping the relationship between the two nations. The legacy of partition continues to influence contemporary politics and relations in the region. As the shadows of colonial rule began to recede, nations across Africa and Asia embarked on the challenging journey of rebuilding and redefining their identities. The struggles for independence, though fraught with hardship, laid the foundation for new chapters of self-determination and hope. In the decades that followed, these nations would seek to heal the wounds of the past and forge paths toward a future defined by their own aspirations and dreams. The quest for identity and unity in a post-colonial world would shape the political landscapes of the 20th century, setting the stage for new challenges and opportunities. The British Empire stood as a colossus, spanning continents and embracing an array of cultures, languages, and peoples. Its governance was a tapestry woven with intricate threads of administration, policy, and control, demanding not only a formidable bureaucratic machinery, but also the delicate balance of power and influence. As the empire expanded, so did the challenges of governing such a vast dominion. At the heart of the British Empire's governance was the Colonial Office in London, a nerve centre akin to the brain of the empire. From this hub, directives flowed outward, reaching the furthest colonial outposts. Here, a network of appointed governors acted as the emissaries of British authority, each one a linchpin in the administrative chain. These governors were the eyes and ears of the British government. tasked with reporting local conditions and implementing policies devised in the corridors of power back in London. Yet, the sheer diversity and geographical spread of the empire rendered a one-size-fits-all approach unfeasible. The British Empire encompassed regions as varied as the rolling deserts of Africa, the bustling markets of India, and the serene landscapes of the Caribbean. Each colony presented its unique challenges, requiring tailored approaches to governance. The Colonial Office sought to manage this diversity through an elaborate system of communication and information flow. Reports and directives moved across vast distances, often delayed by the limitations of contemporary technology. This lag in communication sometimes led to decisions being made without the latest information from the ground, complicating policy implementation. For instance, a policy that seemed suitable in the context of India might prove ineffective or even damaging in the African setting. To address these challenges, the British Empire employed two main strategies of governance: direct and indirect rule. In regions like India, the British opted for direct rule. This method involved British officials taking charge of the administration, overseeing everything from tax collection to law enforcement. Such direct control often meant imposing British systems of governance that disregarded or suppressed local traditions and social structures. The approach in India was characterized by a comprehensive administrative framework, with British officials entrenched in all levels of governance. This method provided the British with tight control, but also bred resentment and resistance among the local populace. In contrast, indirect rule was deemed more suitable for regions like Nigeria. Here, the British worked through existing local power structures, allowing traditional leaders to maintain their positions, albeit under British oversight. This approach was resource efficient, enabling the British to govern vast areas with limited personnel. However, it often reinforced existing social hierarchies and created new tensions, as traditional leaders were seen as puppets of the colonial regime. This dual approach reveals the pragmatic yet often contradictory nature of British colonial policy, balancing control with cost-effectiveness. The underlying economic motivations of the British Empire cannot be overstated. Colonies were viewed primarily as sources of raw materials and markets for British goods. This economic paradigm drove much of the colonial policy, with infrastructure projects like railways and ports developed to facilitate the extraction of resources and the importation of British products. While these projects brought some benefits to local populations, such as improved transportation and communication, their primary purpose was economic exploitation. The railways in India, for example, were designed to transport raw materials from the interior to the ports for export, rather than to serve the needs of the local population. Trade policies were crafted to favor British economic interests, ensuring a steady flow of resources to Britain and a ready market for British manufactured goods. This economic focus often stunted local industry and development, leaving colonies dependent on the British economy. To further consolidate their control, the British introduced their legal and educational systems across the empire. English common law was transplanted into colonial settings, often replacing or altering indigenous legal traditions. This legal transformation had profound societal impacts, reshaping social norms and creating a class of English, educated elites. These elites, educated in the British system, played significant roles in both colonial administration and the eventual independence movements. Education was another tool of cultural assimilation and control. Schools modelled on British institutions were established throughout the colonies. While these schools provided opportunities for some, they also served to promote British culture and values, often at the expense of local languages and traditions. The emergence of English-speaking elites was a double-edged sword for the British Empire. On one hand, it created a class of individuals who could facilitate colonial administration. On the other, these elites became instrumental in the push for independence, using their education to articulate and organize resistance against colonial rule. As the 20th century progressed, the seeds of resistance sown by education and economic exploitation began to bear fruit. Nationalist movements emerged across the empire, each with its unique character and demands. In India, the non-violent resistance led by Mahatma Gandhi captured global attention and inspired movements worldwide. Gandhi's philosophy of non-violence and civil disobedience became a powerful tool against British rule, mobilizing millions across the subcontinent. In Africa, leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya rallied their people against colonial domination. These leaders used their education and understanding of British systems to craft effective strategies of resistance. The global context also played a crucial role in the decolonization process. World War II had left Britain economically weakened, and the rising tide of nationalism made colonial control increasingly untenable. The war also highlighted the contradictions of imperialism, with colonies contributing to the war effort while being denied self-determination. Facing mounting pressure both at home and abroad, the British government began the process of dismantling the empire. The pace of decolonization accelerated in the 1950s and 1960s. India gained independence in 1947, setting off a wave of liberation across Asia and Africa. By the mid-1960s, most of Britain's African colonies had achieved independence. The empire that had once covered a quarter of the globe had largely disappeared within a generation. Despite its political dissolution, the cultural legacy of the British Empire remains profound. The spread of the English language is perhaps the most enduring legacy. English became the lingua franca of government, trade, and education across the empire. Today, English remains an official language in many former colonies and the primary language of international business and diplomacy. The British also introduced their educational systems throughout the colonies, establishing schools and universities modelled on British institutions. These institutions played a dual role. They created opportunities for colonized peoples to gain knowledge and skills, while also serving as tools of cultural assimilation. British cultural norms, from dress codes to social etiquette, were actively promoted and often adopted by colonial elites. This cultural influence extended to architecture, literature, and even sports, with cricket becoming a national passion in places like India and the West Indies. However, the imposition of British cultural norms created tensions with local traditions, leading to conflicts over identity and cultural preservation. In the post-colonial era, many former colonies have sought to revive and preserve their indigenous cultures and languages, even as they navigate the complex legacy of British rule. As the world continues to grapple with the legacies of colonialism, the story of the British Empire offers valuable lessons in governance, resistance, and the enduring impact of cultural exchange. The quest for identity and unity in a post-colonial world will continue to shape the political landscapes of the 21st century, setting the stage for new challenges and opportunities. British colonialism, despite its often oppressive nature, resulted in a complex blending of British and indigenous cultural identities across the globe. Missionary activities played a pivotal role in this transformation by spreading not only Christianity, but also Western education and medical practices. Missionaries established schools and hospitals in regions such as Africa and parts of Asia, contributing significantly to the spread of literacy and modern healthcare. However, these efforts frequently came at the expense of traditional belief systems and healing practices, fundamentally altering the cultural landscapes of colonized societies. Indigenous knowledge and practices were often dismissed as primitive, and the introduction of Western education systems replaced traditional methods of knowledge transmission. This led to a gradual erosion of cultural heritage among many communities. Yet, the cultural exchange was not entirely one-sided. As Britain extended its reach across the globe, it too was influenced by the diverse cultures it encountered. New foods, textiles, and ideas made their way back to Britain, enriching British society and cuisine. The popularity of Indian curry in Britain, for example, is a lasting testament to this cultural cross-pollination. As the British Empire expanded, resistance to its rule also grew. Nationalist movements in colonized regions frequently turned to local languages, religions, and cultural symbols as rallying points. Leaders like Mohandas Gandhi in India and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya used traditional dress and customs to assert cultural pride and independence from British norms. Gandhi's adoption of the dhoti and Kenyatta's emphasis on Kikuyu traditions served as powerful statements against colonial rule. This cultural resistance played a crucial role in the struggle for independence, challenging the notion of British cultural superiority that had underpinned colonial rule. It highlighted the importance of cultural identity and heritage in the fight against colonization and inspired similar movements across the empire. The use of cultural symbols in resistance movements forced the British to reconsider their strategies and policies, gradually leading to a shift towards decolonization. Despite the eventual dissolution of the British Empire, the legacy of British cultural influence remains evident in many former colonies today. English continues to be widely spoken, often serving as a unifying language in multilingual societies. British-style education systems and legal codes still form the basis of institutions in numerous countries. Even cultural products, from literature to music, often reflect this complex heritage of cultural interaction and conflict. The British Empire's profound influence on global trade reshaped the world's economic landscape in ways that are still felt today. As Britain's Industrial Revolution gained momentum in the 19th century, the empire became a vast network of colonies, supplying raw materials to fuel its growing economy. Cotton from India, rubber from Malaya, and minerals from Africa flowed into British factories, emerging as finished goods that were then sold back to colonial markets. This economic system was made possible by Britain's unrivaled naval power. The Royal Navy ruled the waves, securing vital trade routes and protecting British merchant ships. This naval supremacy allowed Britain to become the world's leading trading nation, with its merchants and goods found in ports across the globe. Key trading hubs emerged as linchpins of this global network. Singapore, strategically located at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, became a crucial entry point for trade between Europe and Asia. Hong Kong served as a gateway to China, while Cape Town provided a vital stopover on the road to India. These ports, along with many others, facilitated the flow of goods between continents, integrating previously disparate markets into a global economic system. In the late 19th century, Britain introduced the gold standard with London as its financial centre. This move stabilized international trade by providing a common basis for currency exchange. It further reinforced Britain's economic dominance, making the pound sterling the world's reserve currency and cementing London's position as the global financial capital. Infrastructure projects played a crucial role in enhancing trade efficiency. The British built railways in India, for example, which not only facilitated the movement of troops, but also dramatically reduced the time and cost of transporting goods from the interior to coastal ports. The telegraph network spanning the empire allowed for rapid communication of market information, revolutionizing the speed of trade. Perhaps most significantly, the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 shortened the sea route between Europe and Asia, further integrating global markets. The canal became a vital artery for international trade, drastically reducing the journey times for ships traveling between the continents. British colonial policies were designed to favor British goods and maintain economic control over the colonies. Preferential trade agreements and tariffs ensured that colonial markets remained captive to British manufacturers, while raw materials flowed cheaply back to Britain. This system sustained Britain's global economic influence well into the 20th century. The spread of British banking and financial services created a global financial network that integrated economies across the empire. Banks like Barclays and HSBC, originally established to serve colonial markets, grew into global institutions. This financial infrastructure facilitated international trade and investment, with London at its centre. Resistance and rebellions against British rule were persistent throughout the vast British Empire. The flames of resistance flickered and grew as colonial subjects challenged British rule. These uprisings, spanning continents and decades, ultimately weakened the empire's grip and paved the way for independence movements. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 marked a turning point in British colonial history. This widespread uprising, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, began with Indian soldiers in the British East India Company's employ. It soon escalated into a full-scale revolt against British rule, shaking the foundations of the empire in India. In conclusion, the story of the British Empire is one of complex cultural identities, resistance, and enduring legacies. The blending of British and indigenous cultures has left a lasting impact on societies worldwide, and the economic and cultural influences of the empire continue to shape the modern world. As we look back on this history, we gain valuable insights into the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in a post-colonial world. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, often referred to as the Sepoy Mutiny, marked a turning point in Indian history, shaking the very foundations of British colonial rule. Its roots lay in widespread grievances against the East India Company, which had steadily expanded its control over the Indian subcontinent through a combination of military might and political subterfuge. The immediate spark for the rebellion was the introduction of new rifle cartridges, rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, offending both Hindu and Muslim soldiers, known as sepoys. This act of cultural insensitivity ignited a firestorm of resistance. The rebellion spread rapidly across northern and central India, engulfing cities like Delhi, Kanpur, and Lucknow. The ferocity of the uprising shocked the British, who witnessed their forces and allies being overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the revolt. The brutality of the conflict was felt on both sides, with massacres, reprisals, and widespread violence leaving a deep scar on the Indian psyche. The British response was equally ruthless, as they sought to reassert control and punish those involved. The rebellion's failure led to the dissolution of the East India Company and the establishment of direct crown rule in India, marking the beginning of the British Raj. This shift had profound implications, reshaping Britain's approach to governance and leading to significant military and civil reforms aimed at consolidating their rule. The rebellion also served as a catalyst for the rise of Indian nationalism, as it exposed the vulnerabilities of foreign rule and sowed the seeds for future struggles for independence. While India grappled with the aftermath of rebellion, Africa was witnessing its own struggle for autonomy and survival. The Anglo-Zulu War of 1879 stands as a testament to the fierce resistance offered by indigenous kingdoms against colonial expansion. The Zulu Kingdom, under the leadership of King Cetshwayo, was a formidable military power, known for its disciplined warriors and innovative tactics. The British, driven by their imperial ambitions, sought to annex Zulu territory, underestimating the strength and resolve of their opponents. The war began with the British invasion of Zululand, and the Zulus quickly demonstrated their prowess at the Battle of Isandlwana, where they inflicted a devastating defeat on the British forces. This victory was short-lived, however, as the British regrouped, deploying reinforcements and utilizing superior firepower to turn the tide of the war. The eventual defeat of the Zulu Kingdom led to the annexation of their lands and the dismantling of their political structures. This conquest was part of a broader pattern of British expansion in southern Africa, which saw indigenous societies being subordinated and their resources exploited for imperial gain. The legacy of the Anglo-Zulu War is complex, as it highlights both the resilience of African societies and the relentless drive of colonial powers to dominate. Further north, the Mahdist War in Sudan from 1891 to 1899 was another significant chapter in the history of resistance against colonial rule. Led by Muhammad Ahmad, who proclaimed himself the Mahdi, or the Guided One, the movement was fueled by religious fervor and a desire to overthrow the oppressive Anglo-Egyptian administration. The Mahdist forces, imbued with a sense of divine mission, successfully expelled the British-controlled Egyptian government, establishing a theocratic state in Sudan. This victory was not only a blow to British prestige, but also a symbol of Islamic resistance against foreign domination. The Mahdist state, however, faced internal challenges and external threats, and its existence was precarious. The British, determined to reclaim control, launched a major military campaign led by Lord Kitchener, culminating in the Battle of Omdurman in 1898. The technologically superior British forces defeated the Mahdist army, reasserting colonial authority over Sudan. The Mahdist War left a lasting impact on Sudanese society, shaping its political and religious landscape and highlighting the complex interplay between indigenous movements and imperial ambitions. Closer to home, Ireland's quest for independence was gaining momentum, fueled by centuries of British domination and cultural suppression. The Easter Rising of 1916 was a seminal event in this struggle, as Irish nationalists took up arms in a bid to establish an independent republic. Though the uprising in Dublin was swiftly suppressed, it galvanized Irish nationalist sentiment and exposed the deep-seated grievances of a colonized people. The execution of the uprising's leaders by British authorities only served to inflame public opinion, transforming them into martyrs for the cause of freedom. The subsequent Irish War of Independence, fought between 1919 and 1921, saw guerrilla warfare tactics employed by the Irish Republican Army against British forces. The conflict culminated in the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, which led to the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922. This marked a pivotal moment in Ireland's journey towards sovereignty. Though it was accompanied by partition and the creation of Northern Ireland, a source of tension that persists to this day. In the Caribbean, the fight against slavery and for human dignity manifested in the Jamaican Baptist War, also known as the Christmas Rebellion of 1831 to 1832, led by Baptist preacher Samuel Sharp. This rebellion involved tens of thousands of enslaved Africans who rose up against the brutal conditions imposed by plantation owners. The uprising was fueled by a combination of religious inspiration and a desire for freedom, as Sharp preached the equality of all men under God. Though the rebellion was ultimately crushed, its impact was profound, accelerating the push towards the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. The brutal suppression of the uprising and the subsequent execution of Sharp and many others highlighted the moral contradictions of an empire built on the exploitation of human beings. The abolition of slavery in 1833 was a watershed moment, but it also underscored the ongoing struggles for racial equality and justice in the post-emancipation era. Back in India, the struggle for independence took on a new dimension under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance, known as satyagraha, combined with direct action campaigns, posed a moral challenge to British authority. Gandhi's Salt March of 1930, a protest against the salt tax, captured global attention and became a symbol of the broader struggle for Indian self-determination. The Indian independence movement grew in strength and sophistication, with mass mobilizations and civil disobedience campaigns eroding the legitimacy of British rule. The movement's success was not just in achieving independence in 1947, but also in inspiring other colonial territories to seek freedom through non-violent means. Gandhi's legacy continues to resonate worldwide, as his principles of peace and justice remain relevant in contemporary struggles against oppression. In Kenya, the More Uprising from 1952 to 1960 was a pivotal moment in the country's fight for independence. Primarily led by the Kikuyu ethnic group, the uprising was a response to the injustices of colonial rule, including land dispossession and economic exploitation. The British retaliation was fierce, with a brutal counterinsurgency campaign involving mass detentions, torture, and widespread human rights abuses. The conflict exposed the harsh realities of colonialism and intensified international pressure on Britain to decolonize. Kenya achieved independence in 1963, with Jomo Kenyatta, who had been imprisoned during the uprising, becoming its first president. The Mau uprising left a lasting legacy, shaping the narrative of resistance and resilience that continues to define Kenyan identity. As the British Empire expanded, missionaries played a crucial role in its colonial endeavors, driven by a sense of religious duty and a desire to spread Christianity. These missionaries often preceded colonial officials, establishing schools and hospitals in remote areas, particularly in Africa and Asia. Their efforts were twofold: to save souls and to export Western civilization to indigenous peoples. While they provided essential services, they also became agents of cultural change, challenging traditional belief systems and social structures. This process was complex and often controversial, as many local populations resisted the imposition of foreign religious practices. Some communities developed syncretic religions, blending elements of Christianity with indigenous traditions. Missionaries often collaborated with colonial authorities, promoting loyalty to the crown and helping to create a class of Western, educated elites who could serve as intermediaries. Their legacy is a mixed one, reflecting both the positive and negative impacts of cultural exchange in the colonial context. In conclusion, the stories of rebellion and resistance across the British Empire reveal a tapestry of courage, sacrifice, and determination. These movements, though diverse in their origins and outcomes, share a common thread of challenging oppression and striving for autonomy. As the world moved towards decolonization, the lessons learned from these struggles continue to shape our understanding of freedom and justice. The enduring impact of these events serves as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. The image of missionaries often evokes a complex legacy of both benevolence and controversy. In their pursuit of social reforms, missionaries campaigned vehemently against practices they deemed harmful, such as slavery, while tirelessly working to improve the welfare of indigenous peoples. However, their efforts were often intertwined with the broader goal of cultural assimilation, raising critical questions about the true nature of their humanitarian work. By introducing Western cultural values, missionaries inadvertently became agents of cultural transformation, sometimes to the detriment of the very communities they sought to help. For instance, missionaries in Africa and Asia frequently found themselves at odds with local customs and traditions, which they viewed as obstacles to be overcome. Their attempts to replace indigenous beliefs with Western religious and cultural norms led to ethical dilemmas. Was the imposition of a foreign culture truly a humanitarian act, or was it a form of cultural imperialism? Such questions continue to haunt the legacy of missionary work, as the long-term impact of these cultural assimilation efforts becomes ever more apparent. In regions like India and Africa, missionary schools introduced Western education systems, initially intended to provide basic literacy and religious instruction. These schools gradually became centers for cultural transformation. While they did succeed in eradicating certain harmful practices, they also facilitated the erosion of local traditions and languages. The ethical balance between advocating for social reforms and respecting cultural diversity was a line frequently crossed, with consequences that reverberated through generations. The arrival of missionaries often disrupted the delicate balance of existing religious and cultural systems. In areas with strong pre-existing religious beliefs, tensions between missionaries and indigenous populations could escalate into open conflict. Communities that perceived missionary work as an attack on their cultural identity and traditional ways of life often resisted vehemently. Notable conflicts erupted in regions like India and Africa, where missionary activities clashed with entrenched religious practices. In India, the introduction of Christianity was met with suspicion and at times outright hostility. The missionaries' insistence on Western cultural practices was seen as an affront to local customs, leading to resistance movements that sought to preserve indigenous cultural heritage. In Africa, the situation was similarly complex. While some communities embraced the education and healthcare provided by missionaries, others resisted efforts to dismantle their traditional belief systems. This resistance often led to a deeper understanding of the importance of cultural preservation, prompting indigenous leaders to advocate for the protection of their cultural identities in the face of external pressures. Despite the controversies surrounding their work, missionaries left an indelible mark on the educational and healthcare systems of former colonies. The schools and hospitals established during the colonial era often form the backbone of these systems today. In many countries, the legacy of these institutions is evident in the continued existence of Christian communities and the enduring influence of Western education. Missionary schools played a pivotal role in transforming educational curricula, introducing subjects like science and mathematics alongside religious instruction. This blend of education equipped students with skills that would later prove vital in the struggle for independence. Similarly, missionary hospitals became crucial components of public health infrastructure, providing much needed medical care in underserved areas. The influence of these institutions extends into contemporary society, where the legacy of missionary education and healthcare continues to shape the intellectual and cultural landscape of former colonies. While the introduction of Western education and medical practices brought about significant improvements, it also led to ongoing debates about the preservation of indigenous knowledge and practices. One of the most intriguing and unintended consequences of missionary work was its role in fueling independence movements. By providing education, missionaries inadvertently equipped future leaders with the tools needed to challenge colonial rule. Many prominent figures in independence movements received their education in missionary schools, where they acquired the skills and knowledge necessary to advocate for self-determination. In India, leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru were products of missionary education systems. Their exposure to Western philosophies and political thought enabled them to articulate a vision for an independent India. Similarly, in Africa, leaders like Jomo Kenyatta and Kwame Nkrumah drew upon their missionary education to lead their countries towards independence. The curriculum in missionary schools often included teachings on liberty, justice, and equality, concepts that resonated deeply with students experiencing the realities of colonial oppression. This education laid the groundwork for a generation of leaders who would challenge colonial rule and work towards the establishment of independent nations. The dawn of the 20th century found the British Empire at the height of its power. However, the subsequent decades would present unprecedented challenges that strained the empire to its breaking point. World War I, which erupted in 1914, marked a turning point as Britain mobilized its entire empire for the war effort. Soldiers from India, Africa, and the Caribbean were called to fight alongside British troops on the battlefields of Europe and beyond. Over 1.3 million Indian soldiers served in the war, facing harsh conditions far from home. The war effort also saw a massive mobilization of colonial resources, with raw materials and supplies flowing from every corner of the empire. Despite the contributions of colonial subjects, the cost of victory was immense. Britain emerged from World War I deeply in debt, with its economy strained to the limit. Promises of political reform and greater autonomy made to secure colonial support often went unfulfilled, leading to growing discontent and nationalist movements. The interwar period brought new challenges as the global economic depression of the 1930s hit Britain hard. The economic hardships exacerbated existing grievances against British rule, leading to increased social unrest in many colonies. The weakening of British control over its empire set the stage for further demands for independence. In this context, social movements gained momentum, advocating for economic and political reforms. The British government's inability to address the grievances of its colonial subjects only fueled nationalist sentiments. The shifting global economic landscape highlighted the vulnerabilities of the British Empire, prompting calls for change. World War II placed even greater demands on the British Empire. Once again, Britain called upon its colonies for soldiers, resources, and support. Over 2.5 million Indian soldiers served in the war, alongside hundreds of thousands from Africa and the Caribbean. Colonial territories became vital strategic assets, providing bases and supplies crucial to the Allied war effort. However, the war also exposed the contradictions at the heart of the empire. Colonial soldiers fought for freedom and democracy abroad, while being denied those same rights at home. The experience of war, coupled with exposure to new ideas and cultures, intensified anti-colonial sentiments. Many who served returned home with a strengthened resolve to seek independence for their nations. The Atlantic Charter, signed by Britain and the United States in 1941, further undermined the ideological foundations of empire by affirming the right of all peoples to choose their own form of government. In India, tensions reached a boiling point with the Quit India movement of 1942. Led by Mahatma Gandhi and other nationalist leaders, this mass civil disobedience campaign demanded an immediate end to British rule. Though brutally suppressed, it demonstrated the growing strength and determination of the Indian independence movement. The immense cost of World War II dealt a fatal blow to Britain's ability to maintain its empire. Emerging from the conflict deeply in debt and economically exhausted, Britain's global position was greatly diminished. The decline of British imperial power was evident as independence movements gained momentum across the empire. The legacy of missionary work and the broader history of colonialism continue to shape the world today. The institutions and ideas introduced by missionaries have left a lasting impact, influencing education, healthcare, and political thought. As former colonies navigate their paths to autonomy, the lessons learned from this complex history remain relevant in the ongoing pursuit of freedom and justice. In the face of adversity, the resilience of the human spirit endures, inspiring future generations to strive for a more equitable world. The conclusion of World War II ushered in a new era in international relations, characterized by the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as the dominant global superpowers. Their emergence heralded a profound impact on global politics, as these two nations began to exert unprecedented influence over world affairs. For Britain, and indeed many colonial powers, this shift marked the beginning of the end of their imperial dominance. The United States, fresh from its role as a key player in the Allied victory, embarked on an ambitious economic recovery plan known as the Marshall Plan. This initiative aimed to rebuild war-torn Europe and stave off the spread of Soviet communism. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, was consolidating its hold over Eastern Europe, establishing what became known as the Iron Curtain. The Cold War, a period of intense geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, became the backdrop against which decolonization unfolded. The ideological struggle between capitalism and communism created a global stage where former colonies sought to assert their independence and autonomy. As the superpowers vied for influence, the old colonial order was increasingly untenable. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, the British electorate ushered in a Labour government led by Prime Minister Clement Attlee. This administration recognized the shifting tides of global power and the inevitability of decolonization. The Labour government was tasked with addressing the economic challenges of a post-war Britain and managing the transition from an empire to a more equitable global presence. The Beveridge Report, a groundbreaking document published during the war, laid the foundation for the modern welfare state. It called for comprehensive social insurance and the creation of the National Health Service, reflecting a commitment to social justice and equality. However, the economic strain of maintaining the empire necessitated difficult decisions. Under Attlee's leadership, the Labour government pursued a policy that acknowledged the right of colonies to self-determination. This policy was not only a moral imperative, but also a practical necessity given Britain's weakened post-war economy. One of the most significant milestones in the decolonisation process was the independence of India, often referred to as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. The struggle for Indian independence was a decades-long movement characterised by non-violent resistance and mass mobilization. Figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru became symbols of this struggle, advocating for self-rule and the end of colonial exploitation. World War II had a profound impact on India's path to independence. The British reliance on Indian resources and manpower during the war further fueled demands for autonomy. The Indian National Congress, under the leadership of Nehru and others, became a formidable force for change. On August 15, 1947, India achieved independence. But this momentous occasion was marred by the tragedy of partition. The decision to divide the subcontinent into India and Pakistan led to one of the largest mass migrations in history, with millions displaced and communal violence claiming countless lives. The partition's legacy continues to shape Indo-Pakistani relations to this day. While the decolonization of Asia set a precedent, the journey towards independence in Africa was marked by a unique set of challenges and triumphs. The African continent, with its diverse cultures and histories, experienced varying paths to liberation. Pan-Africanism, a movement advocating for the unity and self-determination of African peoples, played a crucial role in galvanizing support for independence across the continent. Ghana, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, became the first sub-Saharan African country to achieve independence in 1957. This achievement served as an inspiration to other African nations. However, the road to freedom was not without its obstacles. The Mau Mau uprising in Kenya from 1952 to 1960 exemplified the fierce resistance against colonial rule, led primarily by the Kikuyu ethnic group. The uprising was met with a brutal counterinsurgency campaign by the British, highlighting the violent realities of colonialism. Despite such challenges, the momentum for independence was unstoppable. By the 1960s, a wave of decolonization swept across Africa, with many nations successfully negotiating their freedom through a combination of diplomacy and struggle. The Suez Crisis of 1956 stands as a pivotal moment in the decline of British imperial power, when Egypt, under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the Suez Canal. It triggered a dramatic international confrontation. Britain, along with France and Israel, launched a military intervention to regain control of this vital waterway. However, the intervention was met with widespread international condemnation. The United States and the Soviet Union, both wary of a potential escalation into a broader conflict, pressured the aggressor nations to withdraw. This crisis underscored Britain's diminished influence on the global stage and accelerated the decolonization process. In the Caribbean, the path to independence unfolded with a relatively peaceful transition. During the early 1960s, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago led the way, achieving independence in 1962. These transitions were largely characterized by constitutional reforms and democratic elections, reflecting a more negotiated and less confrontational process compared to other regions. The emergence of regional organizations like the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, played a significant role in fostering cooperation and development among newly independent states. Cultural movements also contributed to a sense of shared identity and purpose, further strengthening the resolve for independence. As the British Empire dissolved, a new entity emerged, the Commonwealth of Nations. This voluntary association of independent states, all with historical ties to Britain, provided a framework for continued cooperation and dialogue. The Commonwealth became a platform for mutual support and development, allowing former colonies to maintain connections while asserting their sovereignty. Events like the Commonwealth Games highlighted the spirit of camaraderie and shared values among member states, promoting cultural exchange and understanding. The legacy of decolonization is profound, leaving an indelible mark on both former colonies and Britain itself. The economic, social, and political changes that accompanied independence have shaped the modern world in myriad ways. In Britain, migration patterns shifted as people from former colonies sought new opportunities, contributing to the cultural diversity of the nation. Meanwhile, new global powers emerged in Asia and Africa, asserting their voices on the international stage. The journey towards post-colonial identity and development continues, with former colonies navigating the challenges of nation building and the quest for equitable growth. The story of decolonization is one of resilience and transformation, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. As we reflect on this pivotal chapter in history, we are reminded of the ongoing pursuit of freedom and justice, a pursuit that continues to inspire future generations. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was a pivotal moment in global politics, marking the decline of European colonial influence and the emergence of new power dynamics in the Middle East. The crisis was precipitated by the nationalization of the Suez Canal by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, which was met with military intervention by Britain, France, and Israel. However, faced with intense diplomatic pressure and the threat of economic sanctions from the United States, Britain and France found themselves compelled to withdraw their forces by December 1956. The crisis was over, but its repercussions would reverberate for years to come. The United Nations played a critical role in resolving the crisis, demonstrating its growing influence as an international peacekeeping body. The intervention of the United States and the Soviet Union underscored the shifting balance of power as the two superpowers sought to assert their influence in the region. The crisis strained Franco-British relations, exposing the vulnerabilities of their colonial ambitions and highlighting the limitations of military force in achieving political objectives. Comparisons can be drawn to other Cold War-era conflicts, where geopolitical tensions and the threat of nuclear escalation shaped international diplomacy. The Suez Crisis symbolized Britain's waning global influence and its increasing dependency on the United States. The political fallout in Britain was significant, leading to the resignation of Prime Minister Anthony Eden in early 1957. His successor, Harold Macmillan, adopted a more cautious foreign policy, recognizing the new realities of Britain's reduced status on the world stage. The crisis accelerated the process of decolonization that had begun after World War II, underscoring Britain's inability to maintain its imperial interests through military means. The economic challenges facing Britain in the post war period further compounded its declining power. The country faced significant financial strains, with the costs of maintaining a global empire becoming increasingly untenable. The role of the Commonwealth became more pronounced as Britain sought to maintain its influence through economic and cultural ties rather than direct colonial control. Comparisons can be drawn with other former colonial powers, such as France and the Netherlands, which also faced the challenges of decolonization and the need to redefine their roles on the global stage. The Suez Crisis acted as a catalyst for the decolonization movement, prompting Britain to reevaluate its imperial role. In the years that followed, Britain gradually retreated from its empire, granting independence to most of its remaining colonies. Nationalist movements in colonies around the world gained momentum, driven by a desire for self-determination and freedom from colonial rule. The economic and social impacts of decolonization on Britain were profound, as the country grappled with the loss of its colonial markets and the need to redefine its national identity. Globally, the decolonization process reshaped the geopolitical landscape, as newly independent nations sought to assert their sovereignty and establish their place in the international community. The global response to these changes was varied, with some countries embracing the New World Order and others resisting the loss of their colonial holdings. The Suez Crisis bolstered the prestige of Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser and galvanized Arab nationalism. Nasser's successful defiance of Western powers elevated him as a leader in the Arab world and a symbol of resistance against colonialism. The crisis demonstrated that the era of European dominance in the region was coming to an end, paving the way for new power dynamics and conflicts that continue to shape the Middle East today. The rise of Pan-Arabism, a movement advocating for the unity of Arab countries, gained momentum in the aftermath of the crisis. The Suez Canal, as a vital waterway for global trade, remained a focal point of regional politics, with control over the canal representing both economic and symbolic power. The crisis also had implications for subsequent Arab-Israeli conflicts, as the balance of power in the region shifted and new alliances were formed. As the British Empire faded into history, the Commonwealth of Nations emerged to maintain the connections forged over centuries of colonial rule. The Commonwealth transformed from a club of former white majority dominions into a diverse global body, united by shared values rather than political or economic systems. The organization's core principles, articulated in key documents like the 1971 Singapore Declaration, include democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Economic and cultural ties remain strong within the Commonwealth, with preferential trade agreements and cultural exchanges fostering a sense of shared identity. The organization provides a platform for smaller nations to have their voices heard on the global stage, offering a level of influence they might not otherwise enjoy. However, the Commonwealth faces ongoing challenges, with debates over its relevance and effectiveness in addressing global issues. As the organization continues to adapt, it focuses on pressing global issues such as climate change, sustainable development, and education, leveraging its diverse membership to promote cooperation. The legacy of colonialism is reflected in the Commonwealth and global power structures, with former colonies facing ongoing challenges in achieving sustainable development. Historical ties continue to influence current international relations, with economic disparities rooted in colonial history persisting in many parts of the world. The role of education and cultural exchange in colonial societies is crucial as nations seek to build their futures while acknowledging their pasts. Ongoing debates about reparations and historical accountability highlight the complexities of addressing the injustices of colonialism. As the world grapples with these issues, the pursuit of freedom and justice remains a driving force for many nations and communities. The Suez Crisis marked the shift of global power from European nations to the United States and the Soviet Union, setting the stage for the Cold War era. The diplomatic strategies employed by both superpowers during the crisis reflected their competing interests and the broader geopolitical landscape. The crisis influenced the development of NATO and the Warsaw Pact, as alliances were solidified and military strategies were reassessed. The role of nuclear deterrence in Cold War diplomacy became increasingly significant, as both superpowers sought to assert their dominance without triggering direct conflict. The crisis also had a lasting impact on U.S. Middle East relations, shaping American foreign policy in the region for decades to come. As the world transitioned into a new era of superpower rivalry, the lessons of the Suez Crisis continued to resonate in international politics. Today, the Commonwealth addresses global challenges such as climate change, education, and human rights, striving to remain relevant and influential in a rapidly changing world. Case studies of Commonwealth initiatives highlight the organization's efforts to promote cooperation and development among member states. The effectiveness of the Commonwealth's platforms for smaller nations is an ongoing topic of discussion, as countries seek to maximize their influence on the global stage. Future prospects for the organization depend on its ability to adapt to shifting global alliances and priorities, balancing the diverse interests of its members. As the world faces new challenges and opportunities, the Commonwealth's role as a unique forum for international dialogue and cooperation remains vital. In conclusion, the Suez Crisis of 1956 was a turning point in global politics, marking the decline of European colonial influence and the rise of new power dynamics. The crisis accelerated the process of decolonization, reshaping the geopolitical landscape and leaving a lasting legacy on international relations. As the world continues to navigate the complexities of a changing global order, the lessons of the Suez Crisis remain relevant, reminding us of the enduring pursuit of freedom, justice, and cooperation.